Hi, folks. My name is Ted. You are watching the Business of Cyber podcast on LinkedIn Live. Today, we're going to be talking about something that is very true and dear to my heart. It's about training. And training is, of course, directly correlated to people. And I've got a couple folks here that are going to help me talk about 62443 training courses. And I'm excited to talk with them about their overall experience, not only taking the courses and how they're going to use that in their everyday life working with asset owners. We also have a special guest here from IEC specifically that's going to tell us how you can get started. So the whole vision today is not to make the attendees or make anybody viewing this on LinkedIn an absolute expert at 62443, at IECS, at risk assessments, at system design, but rather start to crack the egg of how do we take care of our personnel within an industry that is already hurting for resources as is. The Business of Cyber series, about a quarter and a half old now, is a collection of discussions with industry leaders, specifically about the non-technical side of cybersecurity for OT. It talks about people, it talks about budget, and it talks about time. These fleeting resources that we seem to never have enough of. We're going to talk today a little bit about the 62443 training courses and how you can get started today, tomorrow, next year on your product and your project roadmap to make your overall asset owner security program a little bit more mature in an efficient manner. So to help me do that today, I've got a couple of people joining. So please help me welcome Mr. Simon Heath as well as Mr. Matt Rothkopf. Guys, how you doing?
Good. Thank you, Ted.
Doing great. Thank you.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So what we're talking about today, folks, is we're a little bit too forward on the slides. Let's go back. What we're talking about today is understanding the IEC 62443 certificate program. Now, there's 4 courses. We're going to learn a little bit about all those different courses, how you become an expert at the end of all those 4 courses. And to do that, I'm joined by 2 very specific, different kind of roles. The first one is a gentleman by the name of Simon Heath. He's been a colleague of mine for about 3 years now. And we talked recently on the phone, and I'm super excited to have him as a real industrial consultant and advisory player in the that has global experience, talk about his direct experience taking the courses recently. Simon, how you doing? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ted. Appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. Well, tell us a little bit about your day-to-day world. What takes up the majority of your time, and what do you hope to gain today by telling the ecosystem about your experience?
Yeah, well, I'm with a system integrator here in Dubai. We cover Middle East and Africa. One of the largest systems integrators, and the focus, at least of my team, is just OT cybersecurity. That's what we do. That's what we focus on. Why 62443? Well, that's all I've been hearing about for the last 3 or 4 years. Right. And for me, I have a lot of people coming to me asking me about 62443. So that really was what prompted me to learn more about it. So I took the courses recently. I think 2 weeks ago now. I passed the 4th exam, which now gives me the expert designation, or at least I think when the month clicks over, I think the 1st of next month I'll receive my badge in my inbox. But yeah, it was interesting. I'm an engineer from background. I started with Emerson, Fisher Controls, as it was way back then, back in 1989. So I've been around the process industries for a little over 30 years now, and I've seen a big sea change there. And obviously in our world, Ted, it was probably only 5-6 years ago that we started to get serious about the whole cyber threat. Right. Until then, we thought it was just a problem that the IT guys faced, because we were air-gapped. Nothing could touch us, of course. Right. So, and obviously those myths have been, exploded and things have changed. So I 62443 was, for me, the first globally accepted standard, and one with probably as close to a complete scope as possible, and I think that's why it's been accepted here in this region. If you look at the different countries in the region, we have a lot of different directives, the new departments or government entities setting up, but really what they're doing is pointing at the standards, and primarily IEC 62443 is the one they point at.
Right.
So I needed to understand it. I don't know if expert is the right word, but a lot of people are relying on me and the OEMs and other systems integrators and, the big five to have all the answers. So it was a personal thing. It was driven by, the industry needs. And in fact, you and I have discussed this before. RFQs, RFPs that I'm seeing, I'm now seeing end users in this part of the world calling for expertise or certification in IEC 62443 as a requirement to bid.
Well, we see the demand is up, right? So in my day job, I just see folks that are ready to mature and they want to align to a certain framework, a standard, a regulatory requirement in some way. And I tend to agree with you. 62443 continues to be one of the more widely adopted series of standards that are out there. So help us understand, we got somebody else that's joining. Help us understand, Matt, learning consultant from the International Society of Automation. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. You and I we haven't known each other that long, but we have had a pretty in-depth series of discussions throughout 2023 on the training, the certificates, the overall program, kind of the mission. It's a real pleasure to have you from ISA today. Tell us a little bit about what takes up the majority of your time and what you hope the ecosystem can gain today, sir.
Absolutely, and thank you for having me on, Ted. And before I say that, congratulations to Simon completing all four and becoming an ISA cyber expert.
Thank you, Matt.
Congrats on that.
It's an investment of time.
It is.
I'm looking forward to seeing how much your feedback on each of the courses.
Hey, and listen, at my age as well, 20, 30 years removed from university, having to pass 4 exams of 100 questions is a little bit daunting.
Right.
I get it, man. I get it.
So what takes up my day? I wear a lot of hats at ISA, but I think the majority of what I do and what really gets me out of bed in the morning and gets me excited to come to work is that I work with individuals and more often with companies in the automation and process industries, and work with them to understand their workforce development challenges and what they need to have a resilient and responsive workforce out in the field. We hear the challenges they have, and then we use the programs that we have. Sometimes it's right off the shelf. Sometimes we customize to make certain programs very relevant to them, and put the training together. You use the certification to gauge that level of education, and then we're not done there. We really take a step back, evaluate what happened. Is our journey complete? Has technology changed? Is more training required? So that's what keeps me busy. I have the great fortune of working with companies around the world, so that's exciting for me. And in the last 5+ years, we've seen an absolute shift to these 62443 programs becoming our fastest growing, most popular programs out there. So it's been a lot of fun.
It's a pleasure to have you. We're coming off the heels with 2 of the biggest registrant numbers that we've ever had for the business of cyber series. So the first one was an overview of the 62443. We had another member, the program manager from ISA, come to do that. And then immediately after that, we had so many comments. Hey, can we go deeper? Can we go a little bit more in depth? Did a poll on LinkedIn and identified that there were 2 specific things that people wanted to talk about. The first was, let's take a deep dive into 3-2. We had that last week, which actually we surpassed 700 or 750 registrants, which was really telling for how many people exist globally in the ecosystem that wanted to learn more. But the second thing that people talked about was, how do I get started? How do I get started? What are my training courses? How do I start this process out? So we're just kind of following the demand of the industry. So as agenda items for today, I think the first thing that we'll do is let's dive into why do we think 62443 is growing. We've already sort of started talking about that a little bit. Let's have a discussion between the 3 of us. Then I want to dive into the 4 courses. Let's go in a little detail, give Simon an opportunity to talk about his experience with each one. And then we'll do kind of a capstone here is Matt can walk us through how do you fundamentally get started? How does this program work? And what are some of the common misconceptions or frequently asked questions? So excited to have any comments that come in through LinkedIn. We can actually review those. If you have specific questions, don't hesitate to let us know what your thoughts are. We'll be happy to answer them. Immediately following this, there is some material that we can provide and Matt can provide specifically on the overall ISA program, specifically for these courses. So big question, why is 62443 training and 62443 in general such a hot topic? I'll take my first stab. I think 62443 is a engineering mindset workflow. I think it's because it's designed as a series of standards that really was rooted in a specific risk assessment methodology for OT environments. That's why I think it's caught on. I think if you take NIST, you take ISO, you take NIS, you take any sort of globally established framework or standard, and you try to shift it to an OT environment, it works sometimes, but it doesn't specifically address all of the industrial and automation control system issues, guidelines, limitations. And so to me, I think that's one of the reasons it has become such a hot topic today. And the other is, I think, which is still one of the most impressive things is, ISA and IEC coming together to write this, but doing so with fewer resources than one might assume, has been able to have so much traction. And I think it's because some of the major energy and oil and gas operators that really drove through their understanding of their needs to really drive adoption. What say you, Simon and Matt?
Well, I can definitely second your comment that it has been an initiative driven by industry. And
right.
You talk about the number of people that come in. These are people that live and work this every day. Oil and gas industry has definitely taken a lead, but we've seen participation from water, wastewater, pharma, food and beverage, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So,
right.
so spot on comments there.
Simon, why do you think globally, and help me remind the audience that your kind of sphere of influence, at least for the last couple of years, has been in a lot in the Middle East. Please confirm or deny that. But more importantly, why do you think these global operators are including this language, these numbers, this standard into their RFPs more? What do you think is driving that?
Well, I think it's a standard that's written with a global perspective. It's all around the OT technology, if you like, the assets. It talks a lot about asset owners, criticality, risk. It's a global language that it uses. And I think that's the key. And in fact, we've had this conversation before. I know I do with your team quite a lot, Ted. The need to have this sort of continuity. So, you may have one plant in Holland, one in Singapore, spread throughout Middle East, Africa, America, and the thing with standards, directives, things like that. If you've got 3 people from different languages, cultures, background, you're going to get 3 different interpretations. But I think with 62443, it's written in such a way, especially around, if we look at 3-2, which you covered with Penny last week, it's built around flow charts. It's very easy to follow, and introduces, of course, zones and conduits. It's easy to follow, and it's because you need that continuity when you're comparing, postures, for example, your cybersecurity posture. You don't want to be comparing apples and oranges. You want apples and apples, so that you can help to improve that posture over a period of time. And I think that's the great benefit of the 62443 standard.
Yeah, I tend to agree. What I like about it is there's some opponents to it. I'll be truthful. I hope to have 1 or 2 of them on the show soon, so we can actually have a healthy discussion of maybe why other risk methodologies are better suited for maybe particular sectors. Here's what I like about it is it requires that you pull in some information about your vulnerabilities, your risks, your overall corporate perspectives, and it forces you through zones and conduits and systems under consideration. Really think about your business, right? The entire thought process and thesis about the business of cyber series is let's connect our cyber investment to what our company is really trying to do, whether it's provide fresh water, whether it's provide really great machinery, or whether it's a factory that's providing something. Is if we understand what those business outcomes are, we can translate those systems with our own risk methodology. I think that is one of the reasons that it's taken off. Well, let's dive in. So if you could talk to us a little bit about IEC 32. So maybe as just to set the foundation, Matt, would you give us a 30-second overview of how the actual training is laid out and how 4 equals expert and things like that before we get started with Simon?
Well, yeah. So you actually had a graphic on the first slide, but the way the training is laid out is each. This will work. This will be great. So the fundamentalists really just the badge number 1, certificate number 1, really covers the standard itself and gives a good, solid overview and understanding of the standard. That is prerequisite to each of the additional exams that follow, certificate 2, 3, and 4, respectively. Once you get through certificate 1, you could take them in any order, but if you're going for expert, I would recommend taking them in the order they're created. And each one, so we have companies and individuals who are very intent on getting the expert to have a full panoramic view of their cyber posture, whereas we have other people that might specialize only in risk assessment or maintenance or program design. The other thing, and I want to step back, one other thing I think that has really contributed to the popularity and the quick growth of this is it's tied into the stability of the critical infrastructure. You mentioned water and drinking water, Ted, but these are things that, oil and gas, these things are important to life going on as normal. I hope that answers the question. If you have any follow-up questions.
No, look, I mean, the way I would look at it is there's multiple courses. Those courses each have a test at the end of it. There's different ways you could do it. You could do a self-learning module. You could do a virtual class. You could do an in-person class. And then when you take certificate test 1, 2, and 3, and 4, you become that expert, right? So diving into IEC 32, that fundamentals course. Simon, tell us a little bit about your overall experience and what you would want others in the ecosystem to know.
Well, look, I'd say this whether Matt was on the call or not. The content is excellent. And I think the delivery is really good. So I chose the self-paced. I travel and we had holidays and all sorts of other. So it self-paced for me was the way to do it. And just like a good book, I found as though I couldn't put it down. My plan was to do it. I think there may have been like 14 modules in IEC 32. I forget the exact number. There was quite a lot to learn there. And I just found myself getting to the end of one and thought, well, it's 10 p.m. Do you know what? I'm going to do another one. And I just found myself carrying on. I was really enjoying it. So there are different mechanisms. Even the sort of they have flip cards and the little cartoon animations for learning. Just to test your that you have understood what's going on. I just really liked the delivery and the ease of understanding. They didn't try to make it too complicated. The only thing I would say about the distance learning is that the labs were on Vimeo, I think it was on. It was a video feed. Having said that, although it wasn't hands-on, it was still very good. I forget his name now. Walt, perhaps. The instructor who does it, and it's terrific. He's very good. He works you through it slowly. So even though I wasn't hands-on, I was still keeping up. And the material that comes with the lab is very good as well. So you've still got questions as you're working through it. So it was really good. And what I will say about fundamentals is, like a lot of people I see on LinkedIn, it was my intention just to do the fundamentals certificate. I was probably going to stop at that point. and funny enough, I amazingly managed to get through the exam, and I can't tell you how nervous I was. I did I think the girls were in Singapore, and they were looking around the room to make sure I had no materials to use during the exam and all sorts. It was a proctored exam, but amazingly, within sort of 10 minutes, they tell you if you've passed or failed. And I actually signed up to do the next one within about 10 minutes. I paid my money and I was ready to go with the next one. I think I actually started the material the next day. So for me, it was a really enjoyable experience.
That's great feedback.
I really enjoyed learning. I guess something new. I knew the concepts.
Right. You've been in the space, right? You've been in the space, so the concepts weren't new. Did you still find value in maybe the presentation or maybe some of the details that taught you something that maybe you didn't know?
The detail. Yeah, it goes deeper, and it was good. And just the way they lay it out was easy to digest. So
sure. Well, that's really encouraging. So if you take a look, Matt, at the kind of the prerequisites, there's really no prerequisites for IC 32. Okay. But it does, I think some people in the industry, ISA may have some recommendations that you may want to spend a couple of years inside of either an industrial operations environment or maybe cybersecurity. From my vantage point, anybody in cybersecurity, in critical infrastructure should take the time to find a way to invest in this course. When you see people attending the fundamentals, how much of I have a two-part question if you can share. The first is, what is the level of experience that you see the average player having in that course? And then number two, do you have data that shows how many folks do what Simon did, which was, I'm going to go ahead and sign up for the next course?
Yeah. So first question, what is the level of experience, I think was the question. And
right.
Especially in the IEC 32 course, we see it across the board. We see a lot of people that come in with just a great depth of industrial automation experience, OT experience, and IT experience. In the IEC 32 course particularly, we see some people that are just dipping their toe that might have more of an IT background than the people that go through the entire program. As you get higher into the levels, certificate 2, 3, and 4, I think that we start to see a trend of people being more focused on that OT career and background working for companies like we talked about, gas and water, wastewater, etc. You asked me if I had data on how many people progress beyond level 1, and I don't have that in front of me. I'm quite sure our marketing folks have it, and what we do see is obviously, or maybe not obviously, but the level 1 course is the most popular. That is the gateway to get through to the others. So we're starting, and as you would expect, you see a lag. You see people starting to invest more and more as they get through. They've met that qualification. And so there's kind of like 4 life cycles going on at the same time. The first one being the most mature.
Makes sense. Well, it's interesting to see how many. You and I have spoken about this, Matt, on how much demand there is for this particular course and how keeping up with that demand is a continual challenge. That's a great problem to have. We opted for the self-paced. I'm encouraged, Simon, that you thought that was effective. Call me old school, but I'm always a believer that if you have an in-person course, why not, right? And I think there's probably value to that. But for the fundamentals, being able to take it at your own pace, I'm encouraged that you thought that was great. And I encourage everybody to take a look at, at doing that, whether you're, go ahead.
Interesting. I mean, the only gripe I would have is that, I live in a part of the world where I don't see them delivering these courses. It all seems to be Europe, Middle East, Europe, America, and maybe Asia Pacific, but there was nothing here. So I kind of felt I didn't have a choice. So I think the ISA are perhaps missing a trick there. But having said that, today I started the registration to actually deliver these courses, because I do think there's a huge need for that in this part of the world. So you'll probably see my name there, Matt. But
it's good to hear.
That was the only reason.
Yeah,
Very cool.
I could elaborate a little bit on that. Is we are looking at expanding our presence. We have capability to put forces on the ground in most places around the world. And when I say most, there's a few embargoed countries and whatnot. We have operations based out of both the United States and Eindhoven, Netherlands. Regarding the format, we did very thoughtfully put that out to be able to accommodate people's learning styles, but also their situation. Somebody that's on field projects all the time may not be able to adhere to a schedule.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And for people that wanted more, maybe they have less experience, the in-person and even the virtual live in-person training, those all have actual hands-on labs where you're dialed in. Actually use cyber connections to do that. So there are different ways, and I'd be happy, so I don't spend too much time here, I'd be happy to answer questions individually, or if there's any right now.
Sure. I don't think we have any questions right now, but I've been at the facility there in North Carolina, and the equipment there that you can use in a hands-on training across the board beyond 62443 is pretty incredible. So, well, very good. So diving into the next course, which is where I think a lot of people spend a lot of their times beyond the fundamentals, is the risk assessment specialist. So this is the second in the series of 4, 2.1 credits that you get. This is where folks are coming that have a little bit more experience. They've already been through level 1. They passed that test. Now they're talking about risk assessments, evaluation of risk assessments that you've done previously, pulling some of that data in, and then getting into a detailed 3-2 risk assessment, understanding zones and considerations, zones and conduits, and then systems under consideration. Simon, what do you think of this particular course? And again, same question. Who do you think it's really best suited for? And your overall comments, sir.
Yes, so look, in this part of the world, and I suspect it's the same. I suspect it's mirrored around the world. We had COVID, we had the slump in the oil price, and what I've seen a lot of companies do, mostly, and especially in the Middle East, a lot of OEMs and a lot of distributors here, and as a result, I've seen a lot of people just sort of throwing boxes and bits of software at what was a perceived threat. The last 6 to 12 months, I've been encouraged. I've seen companies sort of taking a step back and go, do you know what are my vulnerabilities? What really are the risks, the threats and the risks that I'm facing? So I've seen a big need for this. So, I was probably going to get to it, but I got to it sooner than I did because I really enjoyed the first module. And I think this is really important. And this comes back to my earlier point. There's a tender floating around the Middle East at the minute for some 40 odd sites across a number of countries. And back to my earlier point, if you have 3 people reading the same spec or the same directive, or indeed 3 different people doing risk assessments, if you're not following a standard procedure, you're going to get 3 wildly different results.
Totally agree. Totally agree.
And this is why I like some of the products on the market, without mentioning your company's name there, Ted. Just the ability to put this on the dashboard and look at your posture, but knowing that you really are comparing apples for apples here.
Well, I tell you, just the fact that I'll pause you. If somebody goes to this particular course, they understand this is one standard, this is one way. I think when those individuals go back to their work, whether it's at a system integrator, a consultant, or an asset owner, the ability to understand that there are apples and oranges and lemons, Simon, that's to me the important component. It's not to say 62443-2 is the absolute way you must do it, but if you walk away from that saying, a better understanding of the word risk, a better understanding of the word threat, a better understanding of consequence or outcome, does that not lay the foundation for future learnings, which is what we want to kind of drive?
Yeah, no, and absolutely. And again, we made the point earlier about this being a global business. You know,
Yeah.
these companies are all over the world, and if they're going to improve their cybersecurity posture, then they really need to be following the same processes to get to the same answers.
Yeah.
I liked as well. There's a lot of talk in throughout the 62443 standard and also test about best practices. Which I think is absolutely critical. There's good content here, and then there's some really good people now on LinkedIn talking about best practices. I love what Chris does, for example. She posts some terrific stuff on LinkedIn. You've got the usual crowd, Rob Lees and Mike Holcombs. There's some really good stuff on there. And then, having the course to fall back on with that knowledge of, the standard and how, the different things fit together, I think can be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, agreed. It's so when you think about the difficulty of this particular course, it's a little different than the fundamentals. So how would you encourage somebody to say, hey, go for it, even if you've never done a risk assessment yourself? How do you feel about somebody that may have a little bit of apprehension? How would you get them over that hump to say this is worth the investment? What do you think they'd get out of it?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, for me, I did the fundamentals. I wanted to dig deeper. That's why I carried on straight away. I come from an engineering background. I like to know how things work. And I kind of got the taster, if you like, from the fundamentals course. I wanted to dive deeper and understand more about, zones and conduits, for example, how they can be applied. You were talking with Kenny last week, and it was quite interesting about Purdue and how zones and conduits, with Purdue being very rigid, how zones and conduits is perhaps a better way of expressing what's going on in your critical infrastructure. And that's clearly explained, I think, in this particular module. And so too, it's really interesting. Vulnerabilities are vulnerabilities are not just technology. It's people, it's processes, which is clearly laid out here as well. So it's I mean, if you just look at technology, I mean, we don't patch. Patching is so difficult to do in the process industries, especially when we're running 24/7. But that's just a part of it. It's the people, it's the processes, and that was the bit that I really liked.
Well, I think that people that walk away from this course, I think they see where risk assessments can sit in their ecosystem of projects. When you think about a framework-based assessment, we're taking a look at controls. There's a gap. That control either does or does not exist. We start looking at deeper assessments or audits in some people's usage of the word. How effective is that control really in place? I think that the folks walking into the course that may have either preconceived perspectives about vulnerability assessments versus gap assessments versus threat assessments versus risk assessments, these are all pretty subjective words. And I think that's a real hurdle the industry has to start getting over. That's why I like this particular standards, because it enables you to kind of standardize on that, at least to a point where most people could agree. Matt, I'll give you the final word on IEC 33. Anything from your vantage point at ISA that you think the ecosystem would want to know about this particular course?
Well, I think it is, as I mentioned, the most popular of the courses that follow IEC 32, and that's for a reason. Site assessment is important. I don't know that I have anything specific to add other than what's been said, but one exciting development that's happening is ISA is also standing up a site assessment program that will be aligned to the 62443 standard. And I think what you're starting to see is a really nice suite of tools that are valuable to that asset owner and really to all stakeholders. So that would be my comment.
Yeah, we're very excited. One of the things I do like about 62443 is that what you see a lot of folks doing is they let's just take NIST, because it's pretty widely used. They'll take a NIST and then they'll chop it, cut it, alter it. They may even add some different workflows. They'll add in some component of a risk assessment to that. They change it, right? And so it works for them. The asset owner uses it. They create their own visualizations on how they actually improve. We don't see a lot of that happen with 62443. And I think it was designed that way, that we don't want it to have iteration after iteration of changes. So the addition of a site assessment, I think, is really key. I've been impressed with how, I think the words are standardized, right? That this can be comparatively to other groups out there. So, well, very good. Let's talk about design specialist, Simon. This one is now, in my estimate, I'm guessing, Matt, that there's a drop off from level 2 to level 3 if people are not aiming to become the expert, because this really gets into interpreting what comes out of a risk assessment. And for those kind of novices in the group, a risk assessment is essentially a continual process where you're constantly evaluating the positive impact of a cyber control to reduce the likelihood of a known threat affecting a consequence, right? And so when you go to actually design or implement your security program, this is where I think this badge, if you will, really comes in handy. Simon, your thoughts on this particular course compared to the others?
Yeah, look, for me, this was, I'm fortunate. I work with a team of superstars, who are far cleverer than I am. I typically, it's my job to go out, talk to the customer, hopefully make the sale, and then I hand it over to the clever guys to design a controls, solution for these people. So, but I was curious because, we talk a lot in the industry about, network segmentation, system hardening, continuous monitoring, user control, remote access, and all of that is covered in this module. So it was quite interesting for me. I work a lot with the likes of Nozomi and Dragos and Forescout, and but a lot of that was covered in here as well. It went a little bit deeper, and in fact, I maybe to Matt's point earlier, it wasn't too in depth that an IT person could come across and do this course, and they'll have a good understanding of firewalls, but probably haven't done too much around IDS before, and the concept of network segmentation, and of course in our world, anything older than 5, 6, 7 years is probably legacy, and the whole plant is hanging off one common network. It's only been the last few years that we've started to wise up to that and look at the importance of not just vertical but horizontal segmentation on a process plant as well. So there was some good stuff in here as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that folks that are going to be successful in this course, would you not agree, when you start talking about target security levels, when you start talking about zones and conduits, security systems under consideration, did you find that folks that had at least fundamental understanding of those terms and concepts was a little bit of a prerequisite to understand future design and the evolution of that design?
Yeah, I had it, but I think that each of the different modules within IC34 gives a pretty good description around, it talks about two types of firewalls. It talks about, the different types of IDS, host-based, versus, sort of all kinds really. It did a nice job of building up, I think. So yes, it probably helps, and especially if you've seen it in action, it's probably quite useful. But I don't think it would hurt too much somebody coming from, say, the IT world into the OT world and picking up on this.
And so with that perspective, Simon, who do you think is the best, with the exception of anybody that wants to learn more, right? Who do you think within a given team at an asset owner level would be best positioned to go to this particular course, assuming they got the prerequisites? Is it somebody that is at the analyst level that's building out, the actual implementation of and configuration of network systems and SCADA systems, or is it more so someone that's architecting? Who do you think that would be?
Yeah, no, I think it's all levels. I think it's the architects, the analyst. It's the guy that's done the risk assessment and did all the design for the zones and conduits, it makes sense to have him there. All the way down to the technician that's going to physically implement said controls. I think there's a lot there. Plus, and I'm seeing a lot more, as I said, with RFQs, RFPs. If you're bringing an OEM techie or site engineer, or bringing in an engineer from a systems integrator like we are, I think it's quite reasonable to expect them to have this sort of certification.
I couldn't agree more that this certificate is important for integrators, consultants, advisors, right? Because what happens a lot of times, the asset owner know what their end state is. They just may not have the resources of the team to get it done. Primarily time, right? So being able to pull in, even in a limited capacity, somebody with that expertise, I think it saves a ton of resources on their part. So, no, well articulated. Anything, Matt, that the audience should know specific to IC 34?
One other group that we see enrolling in this a lot, maybe not surprisingly, is automation project managers.
Yeah, makes
these
sense.
are people that have to work with those integrators and have to work with their outside contractors. So we see that a lot. And the only other thing I would say is for people, these courses progressively go deeper and deeper. For people that are really interested in the path of continual learning, there's a lot of networking to be done through ISA GCA, ISA Secure, and a lot of working projects. And I think that's where the advanced learning really happens, is when you go through a program like this and then get an opportunity to apply it within your company and also just within the industry groups and peers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's like a funnel. The deeper you go into the knowledge base, the more aligned you are to the people to your left and right. And I couldn't agree more with the groups that you outlined, ISA Secure and ISA GCA. Well, this is our final one. You made it all the way through your exam, Simon, to IC 37, which to me, these are, the real true blue security architects, analysts, operations folks, or infrastructure folks that are constantly evaluating and maintaining an IACS system, right? We've gotten past our fundamentals. We've gotten past our risk assessment. We've designed it effectively. Now we're maintaining. Thoughts on this particular course and what you got out of it, sir?
Well, it was a miracle, of course, that I got to this stage, but I was here, so I carried on. It was interesting. The maintenance. This is, for me, and perhaps it's just the Middle East. It's that aftercare support or after this area is the one where we're really weak, I think, in the Middle East. Yeah. So on this particular course, there was a lot of going back over what we'd learned in the first three modules. So summarizing, recapping the first three modules, and then really the two areas that it focused on, unless I'm missing something, was really around change management and the importance of change management. Because you can't stress enough in an OT environment. That's not something you can just go in, and just make ad hoc changes. It's just not something we can do. So it was a lot around change management, and then the key one for me was incident response. There's a lot of people, I think, in this market that are still sitting there thinking, this ain't going to happen to me. I'm okay. I'm air gapped. I'm fine. And the numbers just don't bear that up. If you've not been hit already, you're lucky. And especially in this part of the world, we talk about the Middle East where, oil and gas is 95% of our GDP. We're an easy target. It's a soft underbelly. We're getting hits weekly, and some of the big names as well. It doesn't always get out there. It doesn't always get to the media, but it's happening. So that belief that I'm okay, which is why an awful lot of companies I talk to in the Middle East don't have any sort of response capability or indeed plans. They may have some plans that have been taken from the IT group and brought down, but there's no, backup procedures, what happens if if I do get attacked? What's the process to get me back online? And has Ted disappeared on us, Matt?
I see it back. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know if he's still there, but I'll carry on talking. One thing I really liked about the incident response part was really the way you laid out the response. Don't just switch everything back on. The old IT adage, well, have you turned it off and then back on again? That's the last thing you want to be doing, of course. And that was one of the key things I took away was a very clear process that when you do get hit, and you will get hit at some point, what do you do? How do I get back on track?
So more or less getting into the details, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. It's interesting because, a lot of folks focus on incident response, or just, it's kind of like the chicken and the egg. This is my perspective. Do you want to do full risk assessments? Do you want to establish your overall ICS security program, then move on to kind of designing your network and then tie into some sort of disaster recovery incident response planning? When in reality, in order to do those effectively, you need a risk assessment. In order to do risk assessment effectively, you need data from the past. So there really isn't a bad time to jump in and get started. I'm happy to hear and glad to hear that you got, what I hear you saying, Simon, is that you got a lot of the details out of how do we actually troubleshoot. We maintain this, we operate this program long-term, right? Yeah. That makes sense. Matt, do you concur with Simon's perspective? Anything else to add about the Certificate 4?
I do, and you also just made a really great point, Ted, is that these things all kind of they work intertwined, hand in hand, and I think it's a healthy way to look at it, as instead of a linear path. Once you get through it, all these things are very much a cycle that are always going, and one is boosting the other, and as you say, you can't assess without knowing how to respond, and vice versa. Interestingly, and I think it speaks to the importance of these programs again, we've seen a lot of the, in the United States here, a lot of the state National Guards focusing on this program entirely, but very much focused on the IEC 37 and Certificate 4. And all that is clearly part of shoring up not only the critical infrastructure, but the safety of the people at the plant, but the community at large. So it really is, it's a big deal.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Well, let's talk real world application. I mean, you can see here, the fundamentals course starts at the top.
Yeah.
You drive those down into really risk assessment, system design, and then maintenance. When you get all four of those, you become an expert. It's a sought after capability that I think not many people have. When we talk about how you're going to go back to your ecosystem of colleagues and asset owners, Simon, how would you say that you're approaching that maybe a little bit differently?
Yeah, well, again, back to my point, I'm seeing a different need in the marketplace, So perhaps what taking the course did was validate a lot of the work we're already doing in the design phase, the design and implementation phase. We were already doing a lot of that work, but it was good to go through the process to make sure that we were covering the spots. But I'm now seeing a lot more need around the risk assessment, the vulnerability assessment.
Right.
And for me as well. I mean, I spend a lot of time with customers. I teach at one of the universities as well, and I spend a lot of time just talking to people about the basics of cybersecurity.
Right.
What are we trying to do?
That's where the industry is. Yeah, I mean, to me, the reason that you would go through the course, a lot of people want to go straight to the deep dark web, the deepest vulnerabilities, the tightest threats, and I think we've seen with asset owners pulling back on their budget in a lot of sectors that when they start getting access to this information, Simon, would you not agree they don't even have the resources to manage these vulnerabilities or manage changes to their environment, to manage updates, patches? So
Yeah,
I mean, it's a challenge, right? I think that's what the course in general will teach you is this holistic approach to your
yeah,
security program, not just the fun stuff.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
absolutely. Training budgets have been hurt, and as you
Mhm.
say, just the resource part of it.
Mhm.
They need companies to come in from the outside world and just help, educate them. Obviously, if I'm coming in from a sales side, I'm perhaps putting a bit of scare factor in there, but it's I find it actually cybersecurity, OT cybersecurity, because like most of us, it's only been the last 4, 5, 6 years. In this particular market, I've always been automation, but I've only
Mhm.
really focused for the past sort of 4 years or so, and I actually find it a lot more. A lot more of a community.
Right.
I see a lot more sharing online, and that needs to carry on. Because
I
there's a
agree.
lot
I think,
more. Yeah,
well, you're carrying it on by being on the show, and that's what I think that's what people need to hear. I guarantee you that there's somebody that's going to watch this over the course of the next week, and they're going to be encouraged to go check out the training. And so, really appreciate your kind of submission of ideas and your humility. Um, I think I couldn't agree more. There's a lot of badge protectors out there in the industry, and we used to have these folks in the Army that you'd go to a training and they didn't really want you to have the badge because that badge, there's not a lot of people that are supposed to have that badge, right? Well, that's an old way of thinking. I think we've got to teach as many people, whether they come from IT, whether they come from
yeah,
operations. We've got a standard. ICE is doing a great job putting this training out.
yeah.
I
Well, the
agree
more
with you,
people have
Simon.
the badge, the easier our jobs become.
I well, that would make too much sense, Simon. So let's not get too excited. I'll give you the last couple words, Matt. We would love for the audience to understand how do you actually get started. Can you guide us to a couple of things that will help folks that are interested in the 62443 training program get started?
Absolutely. And one thing I cannot do is post a comment. I must not have logged in properly, but I did share those with you in the chat, Ted. Hopefully you can repost. But as far as getting in, if you go onto our website, I provided some links that'll be shared either now or later.
I can put them in the comments now.
Yeah, that would be great. Those links really kind of take you to the first part of how to get involved. But I encourage people, if you have questions, or even if you don't have questions, and kind of want to talk about what your ideas and thoughts are, to reach out to me, and either myself or somebody on my team that would be best suited could really walk you through it. What my experience has been is the people that ask the most questions and understand that sometimes we don't know what we don't know are the ones that end up succeeding in this program, both as individuals and as organizations trying to further their cyber posture. I would add to that also. I think Simon mentioned the importance of really spreading this awareness across the organization. And it's all great to have a couple experts in the organization, but it's very important that all the people, from the technicians and the operator on the plant floor to the administrators in the office, understand basic cyber awareness. We're pushing some of that into our technician level and engineering level classes. ISA, even ourselves, has all of our employees to train basic cyber awareness because it is that important.
Yeah.
If people have questions about the links, or if anybody wants a guided tour, I could do that. I don't know how deep you wanted me to go. So.
No, listen, I just loaded up the 3 links that you sent me, as well as your email address to the comments. The cool thing about LinkedIn Live is that even if we don't have as many people right now listening in that are interested, it stays on LinkedIn. And this is a piece of content that I think the ecosystem is going to be encouraged to listen to. Folks are always looking for ways to improve themselves. I've heard great things. I have great things, and my team has great things to say about this overall training course. Simon, Matt, on behalf of the ecosystem, thanks for sharing today. And thank you for joining. As always, ladies and gentlemen, this is the Business of Cyber series, where we are constantly talking about the resource allocation to get your cybersecurity program for an asset owner up to the next level. Maybe that means investing in more people. Maybe it means investing in this particular training. Maybe it means process. Maybe it means more technology. Whatever it is, you're probably not going to have enough of those budgets, those time, and that people resource. And so as you think about how you're going to improve over the long term, I challenge you and the rest of the ecosystem to think about ways you can efficiently get more out of those limited resources by connecting your cyber investments to your overall business outcomes. That'll do it for this particular edition of the Business of Cyber series. We've got some very big announcements coming up in the next couple of weeks. I know we're going to have a major consultant that's going to tell us why 62443 is best guided from an expert consultant view. We're also going to be talking about audits and assessments. We have somebody that is really, really experienced in that realm that's going to come, and we'll have a collaboration. And then finally, we're going to be talking about why OT sites are different in general from a major operator's perspective. My name is Ted. This is the Business of Cyber series, and I thank you for joining. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.